The summons came on a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky pressed down upon the chimneys of Ashworth House like a weight of old pewter. Marigold Hale had been mending the hem of the dowager's shawl, a task she performed with a quiet economy of movement, when the Duke's footman appeared at the door of the dowager's sitting room. "His Grace wishes to see you in the library, miss." The words were polite, but the footman's eyes, trained to read the shifting currents of a great house, held a flicker of something that might have been pity. Marigold set the shawl aside, letting the silver needle rest against the dark wool. She smoothed the front of her gray dress, a garment that had once been part of a better wardrobe, now turned and returned until the seams had begun to whisper of weariness. She had been the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth's companion for 18 months. In that time, she had learned the old woman's habits, her memories, her rare and precious laughter. The Duke, Lucian Ashworth, had been absent for most of it, first in Vienna on diplomatic business, then in London, attending to matters of Parliament. He had returned 3 weeks ago, a figure of sharp angles and cold courtesy, and Marigold had known from the first evening that he regarded her with suspicion. Now, as she walked the long corridor toward the library, she kept her spine straight. She was not a servant. She was a gentleman's daughter, brought low by her father's debts and her own lack of prospects, but she had never forgotten how to walk into a room as if she belonged there. The Duke did not rise when she entered. He stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broad beneath the dark blue coat, his hair the color of winter wheat caught in shadow. When he turned, his face was carved from stone, the jaw clean, the mouth set in a line that spoke less of cruelty than of determined distance. "Miss Hale." "Your Grace." He gestured toward a chair. Marigold did not sit. "I have been reviewing the household accounts," he said, his voice level, each word measured. "I find the Dowager's expenses have increased considerably since your arrival." Marigold's breath caught, but she did not allow it to show. She knew exactly what the Dowager's expenses were: coal for the tenants during the cold snap, blankets for the orphans in the village, a small pension for the retired housekeeper. The Duke, of course, saw only numbers on a page. "Her Grace has been most generous to those in need," Marigold said carefully. "I have merely assisted in the distribution of her kindness." The Duke's gaze sharpened. "You have assisted? How fortunate for you." He moved to the desk, where a parcel wrapped in brown paper lay beside the inkstand. He picked it up and held it out to her. Marigold made no move to take it. "I have been informed," the Duke continued, "that you were hired as a companion, yet my grandmother treats you as a confidant and adviser. She listens to you. She trusts you. That is not the role of a companion, Miss Hale. That is the role of a woman who seeks a higher place." "I have never sought anything beyond the privilege of serving Her Grace," Marigold said, her voice steady despite the cold not tightening in her chest. "Then you will not object to serving her more directly." He placed the parcel on the desk and untied the string with deliberate care. The paper fell open to reveal a gown of coarse brown print, the fabric cheap and serviceable, and a white apron starched to stiffness. The garments were not new. They were the sort worn by the lower maids, those who scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots. Marigold stared at them. "From this afternoon," the Duke said, "you will serve my grandmother as her lady's maid. You will dress her, tend her, and attend her at all hours. You will no longer take meals with her. You will no longer advise her on matters that do not concern you. You will sleep in the servants' quarters with the other maids." The silence that followed was profound. Marigold could hear the ticking of the clock on the mantel, the whisper of the fire, the distant call of a bird beyond the window. She felt the humiliation settle over her like a cold cloth, but she would not shrink. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Is that all, Your Grace?" she asked quietly. The Duke's eyes widened just slightly before he mastered himself. "You are not dismissed from my grandmother's service. You should be grateful for that." "I am grateful," Marigold said. "I am grateful for the opportunity to continue serving Her Grace. May I ask when I am to begin?" "Now," the Duke said. Marigold nodded once, then stepped forward and gathered the print gown and the apron into her arms. The fabric was rough against her skin, the apron crackling with starch. She turned toward the door, her head held high. "Miss Hale." She paused, her hand on the door handle. "My grandmother will be told of this arrangement," the Duke said. "I trust you will not trouble her with complaints. She is too unwell for agitation." Marigold did not turn around. "I would never dream of troubling Her Grace," she said. "She has been nothing but kind to me." She opened the door and stepped into the corridor, closing it softly behind her. Only then, in the dim light of the passage, did she allow herself one slow, shaking breath. The Dowager was waiting in the sitting room when Marigold returned, her sharp old eyes missing nothing. She saw the bundle in Marigold's arms, saw the slight pallor of Marigold's face, and her expression hardened. "He did it then," the Dowager said. "It was not a question." Marigold set the bundle down and forced a smile. "It seems I am to be your lady's maid, Your Grace. I shall do my best to serve you well." The Dowager's hand reached out and caught Marigold's wrist. The grip was surprising, the old woman's fingers thin but strong. "You will not speak of this to him," the Dowager said, her voice low and fierce. "You will not defend yourself. You will do exactly as he has commanded. Do you understand me?" Marigold blinked, confused. "Your Grace, Do you understand me?" "Yes, Your Grace." The Dowager released her, leaning back in her chair with a look of grim satisfaction. "Good. Then we shall see what kind of man my grandson has become, and we shall see how long it takes for the truth to undo him." Marigold did not know what truth the Dowager spoke of, but as she looked into the old woman's eyes, she saw a fire there that had nothing to do with age or illness. It was the fire of a woman who had played the long game before and had never lost. The Dowager smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Fetch your sewing basket," she said. "My shawl still needs mending, and when my grandson next enters this room, you will be on your knees beside me, as humble as any maid in Christendom. I want him to see exactly what he has done." Marigold curtsied, her mind racing, and went to fetch the basket. As she walked, she could not shake the feeling that she had become a piece on a chessboard, moved by a hand she could not see. And somewhere in the house, the Duke watched her from a window, his jaw tight, his thoughts a tangle he could not unravel. Part 2. The servants' quarters at Ashworth House were a warren of narrow corridors and low ceilings, tucked beneath the grand rooms like a second, secret world. Marigold's new room was a closet barely large enough for a bed and a washstand, the window small and smudged with dust. She had been assigned to share with two of the housemaids, girls of 17 and 19, who stared at her with a mixture of suspicion and discomfort. "She was a lady's companion," one of them whispered, not quite quietly enough. "What did she do to be brought so low?" The answer, of course, was nothing. But Marigold did not try to explain. She folded the print gown and the apron into the tiny chest at the foot of her bed, hung her one spare dress on a hook, and reported to the housekeeper, Mrs. Gryce, for instruction. Mrs. Gryce was a woman of 50, broad in the hip and sharp in the tongue. She had been at Ashworth House since before the Duke was born, and she had no patience for fallen companions. "You'll do exactly as you're told," she said, eyeing Marigold's hands. "Her Grace is a particular woman. If you put a pin wrong in her hair, I'll know of it. If you crease her silk, I'll know of it. If you speak out of turn, I'll know of it." "I understand," Marigold said. "Do you?" Mrs. Gryce's eyes narrowed. "You think this is a temporary thing, don't you? You think the Duke will see his error and restore you. Let me tell you something, miss. The Duke doesn't see errors. He makes decisions and he stands by them. The sooner you accept your place, the easier your life will be." But accepting her place was not the same as surrendering her dignity. Marigold learned the routines quickly. The dawn rising, the carrying of hot water, the careful arranging of the dowager's silver hair. She performed each task with the same care she had once given to her father's garden, the same steady patience she had learned during the long years of his illness. The dowager watched her, silent and sharp, as Marigold brushed her hair each morning. "You are good at this," the dowager observed one day. "You have the hands of a lady and the patience of a servant. That is a rare combination." "I have had practice in many things, your grace." "Yes," the dowager said, her eyes meeting Marigold in the mirror. "I imagine you have." The Duke came to visit his grandmother each evening, a ritual he had maintained since his return. Marigold would be present during these visits, standing quietly in the corner of the room, waiting to be called upon. She would not speak unless spoken to. She would not meet the Duke's eyes. But he watched her. She felt it like a physical weight, that gaze. He would sit beside his grandmother, speaking of the estate, of the weather, of the news from London, and all the while his attention would drift toward the corner where Marigold stood, her hands folded, her face composed. One evening, as Marigold knelt to adjust the footstool beneath the dowager's feet, the Duke's voice broke the careful silence. "I trust your new position is not too demanding, Miss Hale." It was a barb, disguised as courtesy. Marigold did not look up from her task. "It is demanding in the way all honest work is demanding, your grace," she said. "I am equal to it." She heard the sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Gryce, who was arranging the tea tray. The Duke's jaw tightened. "I am glad to hear it," he said. "It is good to know that a woman of your intelligence finds satisfaction in simpler duties." Marigold rose to her feet, smoothing her apron. "Satisfaction is a matter of perspective, your grace. Some find it in power, others find it in service. I have learned to find it wherever it may be." The dowager let out a small, dry laugh. "Well said, girl. Now pour my tea and let my grandson sit in silence for a moment. He talks too much." The Duke's face flushed, but he said nothing. Marigold poured the tea with steady hands, placed the cup precisely on the saucer, and stepped back into her corner. That night, as she returned to her small room, she heard the Duke's voice in the corridor behind her. "Miss Hale." She stopped, her hand on the door. "What you did for that tapestry," he said, his voice oddly strained. "The one in the blue drawing-room, the tier along the border, did you mend it?" Marigold turned slowly to face him. The corridor was dim, lit only by a single candle on the wall, and the shadows played across his face, softening the hard lines of his jaw. "Yes, your grace. It was not your duty to do so. The tapestry is old. It could have been sent to London for repair." "It could have," Marigold agreed. "But the thread would not have been the same. I found the original colors in the sewing room. It seemed a small thing to do for her grace, who values the piece." The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "It is not a small thing to care for another person's treasures." Marigold did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. The candle flickered, sending a shiver of light across the walls. "Good night, Miss Hale," the Duke said finally and turned away. Marigold watched him go, her heart beating too fast, and wondered why his voice had sounded so uncertain. The next morning, when she arrived at the dowager's room, she found the old woman sitting up in bed, a small smile on her lips. "I am pleased with you," the dowager said. "You did not falter. That is good. But the test is not over. It has barely begun." "What test, your grace?" Marigold asked, setting down the jug of warm water. The dowager's smile widened, and for the first time, Marigold saw something in the old woman's eyes that looked very much like pride. "The test of my grandson's heart," she said, "and I intend to watch him fail it before he learns to pass." Marigold frowned. "I do not understand." "You do not need to understand," the dowager said. "You only need to continue being exactly who you are. Now hand me my shawl. "It is cold this morning and I have a letter to write." And as Marigold fetched the shawl, she could not shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something vast, something she could not yet see, and that the Dowager was the only one who knew the shape of it. Part 3. The invitation to the ball arrived 3 weeks later, engraved on heavy cream paper and addressed to the Duke alone. It was to be the event of the season, a grand affair at Ashworth House itself, intended to mark the end of the Duke's mourning period and his formal re-entry into society. The preparations consumed the household for weeks. Silver polished to a mirror shine, chandeliers hauled down and cleaned, the great ballroom aired and filled with flowers until the air itself seemed to have a pulse of perfume. Marigold was not invited, of course. She was assigned to the upstairs maids, tasked with carrying trays of champagne and collecting discarded gloves. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gryce, delivered the news with visible satisfaction. "You'll wear the black dress and the white apron," she said, "and you'll keep your eyes down and your mouth shut. If a single glass is broken, if a single guest is troubled, it will be on your head." Marigold nodded, her face calm, but inside she felt a cold weight settling in her chest. This was to be her public humiliation. The Duke had not said a word to her about the ball, had not even looked at her when Mrs. Gryce passed on the instructions. But she knew, with a certainty that sat heavy in her bones, that he wanted her there, visible in her servant's clothes, as a reminder of her place. The night of the ball arrived, and Ashworth House blazed with light. Carriages lined the drive, their lamps glowing like fireflies in the dark. Ladies in silk and satin swept through the entrance hall, their laughter rising like birdsong. Gentlemen in dark coats and polished boots followed, their voices a low rumble beneath the music that spilled from the ballroom. Marigold stood in the service corridor, a tray of champagne glasses balanced in her hands. The tray was heavy, the crystal glasses trembling with each breath she took. Her black dress was scratchy against her skin, the apron stiff and white. She could hear the orchestra tuning their instruments, the murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter. "Move, girl," Mrs. Gryce hissed. "The guests are waiting." Marigold stepped into the ballroom. The light was overwhelming, 1,000 candles reflecting off mirrors and polished floors, turning the room into a sea of gold. The dancers were already forming sets, their movements precise and elegant. Marigold moved along the edge of the room, her eyes scanning for the other maids, her tray held steady. She saw the Duke almost immediately. He stood near the fireplace, talking to a group of men, his dark coat immaculate, his expression one of practiced ease. Beside him stood a woman in a gown of deep emerald, her hair arranged in an elaborate crown of curls. She was laughing, touching his arm, and the Duke was smiling down at her with a warmth that Marigold had never seen from him before. Marigold looked away. She moved through the crowd, offering champagne, accepting empty glasses, her movements mechanical. The heat of the room pressed against her, the noise washing over her in waves. She felt invisible, a shadow among the brightness, and for that she was grateful. And then she saw the footman. His name was Peter, a young man with a sullen mouth and a grudge that went back years. He had been the one to tell Mrs. Gryce about Marigold's arrival in the house, the one to spread the rumor that she had been sent down for trying to trap the Duke into marriage. Marigold had heard the whispers, but she had not confronted him. What would be the point? Now, as she passed him, he stepped back, his foot shooting out just far enough to catch the edge of her shoe. Marigold stumbled. The tray tilted, the glasses sliding, and then it was gone, the weight leaving her hands as the tray clattered to the floor in a shatter of crystal and champagne. The sound was like a gunshot, cutting through the music and the laughter, silencing the room in an instant. Marigold stood frozen, her hands empty, the shards of glass glittering at her feet like scattered diamonds. The champagne soaked into the hem of her dress, cold against her ankles. Every eye in the room was on her, 1,000 stares pressing down like a physical weight. She heard the whispers. "Who is that?" A maid, obviously. How clumsy. Someone should dismiss her. The Duke had turned at the sound, his face going pale. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out as if to do something, but then he stopped, his expression shifting from shock to something else, something that looked like anger or perhaps regret. Peter, the footman, melted back into the crowd, his face a mask of concern. "I'm so sorry, miss," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't see you there." The lie hung in the air, but no one questioned it. Marigold was a servant. Servants were clumsy. Servants were to blame. And then the dowager spoke. She had been sitting in a chair at the edge of the ballroom, a shawl draped over her shoulders, watching the proceedings with her sharp old eyes. Now she rose slowly, and the movement silenced the room more effectively than any word. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, who had not stood at a public event in 2 years, walked across the ballroom floor with her cane tapping against the polished wood and stopped beside Marigold. She looked at the broken glass, the champagne soaking into the floor. Then she looked at her grandson, who stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. "Lucien," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silence, "come here." The Duke obeyed, his step slow and measured. When he reached his grandmother, he stopped, his hands at his sides. The dowager turned to face the assembled guests. Her expression was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes that Marigold had seen before in the sitting room when she had spoken of tests and truths. "You see this woman," the dowager said, her voice rising. "This woman, whom my grandson has treated as a servant, was the one who saved this estate from ruin while he was abroad." The words landed like a stone in still water. Silence. Then a ripple of whispers, spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Marigold felt the floor tilt beneath her. She stared at the dowager, her mind blank, her heart pounding. What was she saying? What did she mean? The Duke's face had gone white. He stared at his grandmother, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The dowager did not look at him. She looked at Marigold, and her expression softened just slightly. "Miss Hale," she said, "for 2 years you have been my companion, but before that you were my advisor. You found the discrepancies in the estate accounts. You uncovered the manager's theft. You worked with me night after night to save this house from being sold, and you asked for nothing in return, not a penny, not a word of thanks. You did it because you believed it was right." The whispers grew louder, but Marigold could barely hear them. She was staring at the dowager, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "My grandson," the dowager continued, her voice cutting through the noise, "believed you were a fortune hunter. He believed you had ingratiated yourself with me for your own gain. He humbled you, thinking he was protecting this family. And you bore it in silence because you are a better woman than any of us in this room." The dowager turned to the Duke, her eyes blazing. "Lucien," she said, and her voice was like the crack of a whip, "you have made a grave error, and I will not allow you to hide from it any longer." The Duke stood motionless, his face a mask of shock and shame. The candles flickered, sending shadows dancing across his features. And in the silence, Marigold raised her head, wiped the champagne from her hands, and looked directly at the man who had tried to break her. She did not speak, she did not need to. The truth was out, and it was enough. Part 4. The library felt like a tomb. After the dowager's declaration, the ball had dissolved into chaos. Guests had been ushered out with hasty apologies, their faces alight with scandal. The orchestra had packed up their instruments in hurried silence. The servants had swept up the broken glass, their eyes wide, their whispers sharp as knives. And Marigold had been summoned to the library by the Duke, who stood now by the window, his back to her, his hands braced against the sill. She did not sit. She stood in the center of the room, her black dress stained with champagne, her hands still trembling from the shock of what had happened. But she held herself straight. She would not allow this man to see her break. "Tell me," the Duke said, his voice raw, "tell me it is true." "It is true," Marigold said quietly. He turned, his face haggard, his eyes red as if he had been fighting back emotion. "Why did you not tell me? Why did you not explain what you had done for this house? Would you have believed me?" The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. The Duke flinched. "I did not know," he said. "I did not know any of it. My grandmother said nothing. The steward said nothing. The ledgers they were immaculate when I returned. I thought the estate had been well managed. I thought." "You thought I was a threat," Marigold finished for him. "You looked at me and saw a woman without fortune, without family, without protection. You assumed the worst because it was easier than asking questions." The Duke shook his head, stepping toward her. "That is not fair. I was trying to protect my grandmother. She is an old woman and you were a stranger, and I thought—" "You thought," Marigold said, her voice rising, "that a woman who spent every day with her Grace, who listened to her stories and held her hand and mended her shawl, was somehow deceiving her. You thought that kindness was a mask. You thought that love was a weapon, and you were wrong." She stopped, her breath catching. She had not meant to speak so plainly, but the truth was pouring out of her now, a flood she could not contain. The Duke stared at her, his face a landscape of shock and shame. "I was wrong," he said. "I know I was wrong. Miss Hale, Marigold, I will make this right. I will restore your position. I will speak to the household. I will ensure that no one ever treats you with anything less than the respect you deserve." Marigold shook her head slowly. "You cannot restore what you never gave me. You cannot make this right with a few words and a change of title. You humiliated me. You put me in a servant's gown and handed me an apron and told me to know my place. You let your household whisper about me, let them believe the worst, and you never once asked me for the truth." She reached up and began to untie the apron strings, her fingers steady despite the turmoil inside her. The apron fell away, and she folded it carefully, placing it on the desk between them. "I will continue to serve your grandmother," she said. "I will do so as her lady's maid because that is the position you gave me, and I will not be accused of taking anything I have not earned. But I will not accept your apology. I will not accept your pity. And I will not stay in this house one moment longer than necessary." The Duke's hand moved as if to reach for her, but then stopped. "Please," he said, and the word cracked in his throat. "Please do not leave. Let me make this right. Let me prove to you that I am not the man you think I am." "You are exactly the man I think you are," Marigold said, her voice soft but unyielding. "And that is the tragedy of it." She turned and walked out of the library, leaving the folded apron on the desk and the Duke standing alone, his hand still outstretched, his face a mask of regret. The Dowager was waiting in the corridor, leaning on her cane, her expression unreadable. "You spoke well," she said. Marigold stopped, her heart pounding. "Why did you do it? Why did you expose him like that in front of everyone?" The Dowager's lips curved in a faint smile. "Because my grandson is a proud man. Pride is not a sin, but it can become one when it blinds us to the truth. He needed to be humbled. He needed to see what his arrogance had cost, and now he has seen it." "And what about what it cost me?" Marigold asked, her voice shaking. "What about my dignity, my reputation? What about the whispers that will follow me for the rest of my life?" The Dowager reached out and took Marigold's hand. Her grip was warm, steady. "Your dignity is intact, child. Your reputation has been repaired in a single sentence. The Ton will speak of this for months, and they will speak of you as a heroine. They will pity you, perhaps, but they will also admire you, and my grandson will be the one they blame." Marigold shook her head. "I do not want their pity. I do not want their admiration. I just want to be left alone." "I know," the Dowager said gently, "but that is not the hand you have been dealt. You are in the middle of something now, whether you wish it or not. The question is what you will do with it." Marigold looked down at her stained dress, at the champagne still drying on the fabric. "I do not know," she admitted. "I do not know what to do." The Dowager squeezed her hand. Then let me guide you, not as a servant and not as a companion. Let me guide you as a friend." Marigold looked up, her eyes searching the old woman's face. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you saved this house," the dowager said. "Because you saved me, and because I have watched my grandson turn into a man I do not recognize, and I believe you are the only person who can remind him of who he used to be." Marigold shook her head. "I am not a savior. I am just a woman who knows how to read a ledger." The dowager laughed, a dry, rustling sound. "That is exactly what he needs. Now go and rest. Tomorrow the real work begins." And as Marigold walked back to her small room, she could not help but feel that the real work had already begun, and that she was being drawn into something far larger than herself, something that would change the course of her life in ways she could not yet imagine. Part 5. The days after the ball passed in a strange, suspended silence. Marigold continued her duties as the dowager's maid, rising at dawn, carrying warm water, arranging the old woman's silver hair. But the atmosphere in the house had changed. The other servants treated her differently now, not with warmth but with a wary respect, as if she were a piece of delicate china that might break at any moment. Mrs. Gryce no longer snapped at her. The footmen stepped aside when she passed. And Peter, the footman who had tripped her, had been dismissed without ceremony, his belongings packed and his wages paid before the sun had fully risen. The Duke did not speak to her. He was present in the house, of course. She saw him at meals, passing in the corridor, riding out across the estate, but he kept his distance. It was as if he had drawn a circle around himself, a barrier of silence that she could not cross. But she felt his eyes on her constantly, a weight that followed her from room to room, and she knew that he was watching, waiting, trying to find a way to make amends. The dowager watched him too, with a satisfaction that bordered on amusement. "He is suffering," she observed one morning as Marigold brushed her hair. "Good, let him suffer. It is good for a man to suffer for his sins." "I do not wish him to suffer," Marigold said quietly. "I only wish him to understand." "Understanding and suffering are often the same thing," the dowager said. "Do not be too quick to forgive him. Forgiveness that comes too easily is not forgiveness at all. It is merely surrender." Marigold did not answer. She was not sure she had anything left to surrender. It was 3 days after the ball that Mr. Thorne arrived. He was a gentleman of modest fortune, new to the neighborhood, and he had heard of the scandal from a mutual acquaintance. He called at Ashworth House with a basket of hothouse fruit and a card that declared him to be a great admirer of the dowager's late husband. The dowager, who had known Mr. Thorne's father many years ago, received him with cautious warmth. Marigold was present during the visit, standing in her usual corner, her hands folded. Mr. Thorne was a handsome man, with dark hair and a pleasant smile, and his eyes kept drifting toward her with a curiosity that made her uncomfortable. "Your maid is quite accomplished, I hear," Mr. Thorne said, his tone light. "The whole county is speaking of her." "Miss Hale is not my maid," the dowager said sharply. "She is my companion, and she has been treated most unjustly. I trust you have come to pay your respects, not to pry." Mr. Thorne flushed. "Of course, Your Grace, I meant no offense. I simply wished to express my admiration for Miss Hale's courage." Marigold inclined her head, saying nothing, but she felt the weight of his gaze, and she did not like it. After the visit, Mr. Thorne began to call regularly. He brought books, offered to read to the dowager, invited them both to tea at his rented house. The dowager, who had spent too long confined to her rooms, accepted some of the invitations, and Marigold found herself drawn into a new social sphere, not as a servant but as something else, something she did not quite understand. The Duke, of course, noticed. One afternoon, as Mr. Thorne was departing, the Duke appeared in the entrance hall, his face dark with something Marigold could not read. "Thorne," he said, his voice cool, "I did not expect to see you here again." Mr. Thorne smiled. "I have found your grandmother's company to be most enjoyable, Your Grace, and Miss Hale's as well. The Duke's jaw tightened. I see. Then I suppose I should thank you for entertaining them. It is good to know that the women of my household are so well cared for. The words were polite, but the edge beneath them was sharp. Mr. Thorne's smile did not waver. I do my best, he said. A man must do what he can to make himself useful to those he admires. He bowed and departed, leaving the Duke standing in the hall, his hands clenched at his sides. Marigold, who had been watching from the staircase, saw the look on the Duke's face and felt something twist inside her. It was not jealousy, she told herself. It was something else, something she did not want to name. That evening the Duke appeared in the Dowager's sitting room, his expression strained. "Grandmother," he said, "I must speak with you." The Dowager looked up from her needlework. "Speak then." "Alone." The Dowager glanced at Marigold, who had risen to leave. "Sit down, girl. My grandson can speak plainly in front of you. You have earned that much." The Duke's face reddened. "Very well. Grandmother, I do not trust this Mr. Thorne. He has been asking questions about the estate, about our finances, about Miss Hale. I do not like it." The Dowager's eyebrows rose. "And why do you imagine he is interested in such things?" "I do not know, but I intend to find out." Marigold watched the exchange in silence, her heart beating too fast. The Duke had said he did not trust Mr. Thorne. But was that genuine concern, or was it simply jealousy? The Dowager set down her needlework and looked at her grandson with a steady gaze. "Lucien, you have spent months treating this woman as a threat. Now you are treating another man with suspicion because he has shown her kindness. Do you not see the pattern?" The Duke opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. He stood there, his face a study in frustration, and then he turned and left the room without another word. Marigold stared after him, her heart pounding. The Dowager chuckled softly. "He is learning," she said. "Slowly perhaps, but he is learning." The next morning, Marigold found a small package on her bed. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with a plain string. Inside was a book of poetry, well-worn and clearly loved, and a note in a neat, masculine hand. "For Miss Hale, with my sincere admiration, A.T." Marigold stared at the note, her fingers tracing the letters. Mr. Thorne had given her a gift, and it was a kind one. But as she held the book, she could not help but think of another pair of eyes, watching her from across the room, and the way the Duke had looked at her in the corridor that night, his voice uncertain, his face half in shadow. She pushed the thought away. She would not be drawn into his web. She would not allow herself to care for a man who had treated her so cruelly. And yet, as she tucked the book into her chest and went to fetch the Dowager's water, she could not shake the feeling that the game was far from over, and that the pieces were moving in ways she could not see. Part 6. The garden at Ashworth House was a wild, tangled thing, left to grow with a neglect that bordered on intention. The roses had climbed their trellises and spilled over the paths, their blooms heavy with summer. The hedges had grown uneven, their edges blurred with ivy. It was a place of secrets, of shadows and sudden clearings, and Marigold had come to love it in the weeks since the ball. She walked there now, the book of poetry from Mr. Thorne tucked under her arm, the evening air soft against her face. She had needed to escape the house, to breathe, to think. The days had grown increasingly tense, the Duke silent, watching a constant pressure, Mr. Thorne's attentions a source of confusion. She did not know what she wanted anymore. She only knew that she could not stay in this limbo forever. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. The Duke stood at the edge of the rose garden, his hands at his sides, his face unreadable. He was dressed in his riding clothes, the boots dusty, the coat slightly rumpled. He looked as if he had been packing, or perhaps as if he had ridden too hard in an attempt to escape his own thoughts. "Miss Hale," he said, "forgive me for intruding. I did not expect to find you here." "It is your garden, your grace," Marigold said. "I am the one who should apologize for trespassing." He shook his head. You are not trespassing. You are a guest in this house. I have made sure of it." Marigold said nothing. The word guest felt hollow, a title that did not fit the reality of her situation. She was not a servant anymore, but she was not a guest either. She was something in between, something undefined. The Duke took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "I have been trying to find the words to speak to you," he said. "But every time I try, I fail. I am not a man who is good with words. I am a man of action, of decisions. But I have learned in these past weeks that my actions have caused great harm, and I do not know how to undo it." Marigold looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the library. His face was thinner, the lines around his eyes deeper. He looked tired, worn, as if the weight of his mistakes had aged him. "You cannot undo it," she said quietly, "but you can stop repeating it. That is what matters now." He nodded slowly. "I am trying. I have been trying. I have met with the tenants, spoken with the steward, reviewed the ledgers you prepared. I have begun to understand what you did for this estate, for my grandmother, and I have begun to understand what I did to you." "What do you mean?" Marigold asked. The Duke took a breath as if steeling himself. "I mean that I saw you as a threat before I ever knew you. I looked at your shabby dress and your quiet dignity, and I thought, this woman is too good to be true. She must want something. She must be after something. And so I treated you as if you were guilty before you had done anything to deserve it." He paused, his voice dropping. "That is not justice, that is prejudice, and it is not the man I want to be." Marigold felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the knot she had been carrying for weeks. But she did not speak. She waited. The Duke took another step, closing the distance between them. The roses seemed to lean toward them, their scent heavy in the air. "I know you do not trust me," he said. "I know you have no reason to, but I want to earn that trust. I want to show you that I am capable of change. And I want to ask you humbly if you will allow me to try." Marigold looked at him for a long moment, her heart beating against her ribs. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what I think of you?" The Duke's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw the vulnerability there, the raw, unguarded truth. "Because I admire you," he said. "Because I have never met anyone like you. Because the thought of you leaving this house, of never seeing you again, fills me with a dread I cannot explain." He stopped as if the words had cost him something. The silence stretched between them, fragile and electric. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," he said. "I am not asking for your affection. I am only asking for the chance to prove that I am not the man you thought I was." Marigold's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But the memory of that library, of the print gown and the apron, was still too fresh. "Prove it," she said. "Not to me, to yourself. Live as the man you want to be and do not ask me to watch. When you can stand in that library and look at yourself without shame, then perhaps we can speak again." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing among the roses, his face a mixture of hope and despair. The next morning, Mr. Thorne called again. He was waiting in the drawing room when Marigold entered, his smile bright and easy. But there was something in his eyes, something calculating, that made her pause. "Miss Hale," he said, rising, "I have been thinking of you." "That is very kind," Marigold said cautiously. "Not kind, honest." He stepped toward her, his voice lowering. "I have grown fond of you in these past weeks. I find myself drawn to your strength, your intelligence, your beauty, and I wonder if you might consider a position as my secretary. I have a small estate in Somerset, and I require someone with a sharp mind to manage the accounts. I would pay you well, and you would have your own cottage, your own independence." Marigold stared at him. "You are offering me employment." "I am offering you a new beginning," he said. "Away from this house, away from the Duke, away from the gossip. You could start fresh, with no one to answer to but yourself." It was tempting. It was more than tempting. It was the escape she had been longing for, the chance to leave Ashworth House behind and begin again. But as she looked at Mr. Thorne's smile, she saw something that made her hesitate. It was too eager, too knowing. It was the smile of a man who expected her to say yes, who had already calculated the outcome. "I will think on it," she said carefully. Mr. Thorne's smile widened. "Of course, take all the time you need, but know that my offer will not wait forever." He left shortly after, and Marigold stood alone in the drawing room, her mind racing. She did not trust Mr. Thorne, but she could not deny that his offer had opened a door she had not considered. That evening, the Duke appeared at her door. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. He held a sheaf of papers, folded and creased. "I have been investigating Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice tight. "I hired a man in London. I needed to know if my suspicions were justified." Marigold's heart stopped. "What did you find?" The Duke held out the papers. "He is not what he seems. His name is not Thorne. He is a fortune hunter, wanted for fraud in 3 counties. He has been asking about my grandmother's hidden wealth, about the estate, about you. He believes you are the key to the dowager's fortune, and he intends to marry you to get it." Marigold took the papers, her fingers numb. The words blurred before her eyes. "I did not want to believe it," the Duke said. "I thought it was jealousy. I thought I was projecting my own faults onto him, but it is true. I have proof." Marigold looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw the man she had hoped he could become. He had not brought her this information to sabotage her suitor. He had brought it to protect her, even knowing she might not believe him, even knowing she might reject him again. "Why did you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because your safety matters more than my pride," he said. "Because I would rather lose you to the truth than keep you in ignorance. And because I made a promise to myself that I would never again let my assumptions hurt you." The papers slipped from Marigold's fingers and fell to the floor. She stood there, staring at the Duke, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. And in that moment, something between them changed. Part 7. The morning after the revelation, Mr. Thorne did not come to Ashworth House. In fact, he did not come at all. He had been seen, according to the groom who brought the news, boarding the early coach to London with a single bag and a face like thunder. The Duke had not needed to confront him. The truth had been enough to drive him away, and he had slipped into the anonymity of the city like a fox into the underbrush. Marigold learned of his departure from Mrs. Gryce, who delivered the news with a grudging respect. "His Grace did not want you troubled with the details," she said, "but I thought you should know. The man is gone. You are safe." Safe? The word felt strange on Marigold's tongue. She had not felt safe in a long time, not since her father's death, not since the loss of her home, not since the Duke had handed her the print gown and the apron. But now, standing in the corridor of Ashworth House, she realized that something had shifted. The walls no longer felt like a prison. The shadows no longer held threats. She walked to the dowager's room and found the old woman sitting by the window, a letter in her lap. "You have heard," the dowager said. It was not a question. Marigold nodded. "I have heard." The dowager smiled faintly. "My grandson has finally done something right. It is a small miracle, but I will take it." "He did more than that," Marigold said. "He told me the truth. He put my safety above his pride. He is not the same man who gave me that gown." The dowager's eyes sharpened. "And what do you intend to do about it?" Marigold hesitated. The question had been circling in her mind for days, a constant, restless presence. What did she intend to do? She had been offered a position by Mr. Thorne, but that offer was now dust. She could stay at Ashworth House, but the thought of remaining in this limbo, neither servant nor guest, was unbearable. "I think," she said slowly, "that I must leave." The dowager did not look surprised. She only nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I understand," she said. "But before you go, I would ask you to do one thing. Speak to my grandson. Not as his servant, not as his accuser. Speak to him as an equal. Give him the chance to say what he needs to say." Marigold looked down at her hands. She did not want to face the Duke again. She did not want to hear his apologies, his promises, but she owed it to herself and to him to hear him out. "Very well," she said, "I will speak to him." She found him in the library, standing in the same spot where he had stood the day he handed her the print gown and the apron. But he was not standing by the window now. He was standing by the desk, his hand resting on a small, leather-bound book. He looked up when she entered, and his face was different. The arrogance was gone. The coldness was gone. In its place was something raw, something unguarded, something that looked very much like hope. "You came," he said. "I came," Marigold said. "The Dowager asked me to." "Of course she did." He smiled, a small, self-deprecating smile. "She has been managing me since I was a boy. I suppose she will never stop." Marigold did not smile. She walked to the desk and stood across from him, her hands folded. "You wanted to speak to me. I am here. Speak." The Duke took a breath. Then he opened the leather-bound book and turned it toward her. It was a ledger filled with neat columns of figures, but these were not estate accounts. These were something else entirely. "This is my ledger of faults," he said. "I began keeping it the night of the ball, after my grandmother spoke. I wrote down every mistake I have made, every assumption, every cruelty. I wanted to see them in my own hand, so I could not pretend they did not exist." Marigold stared at the page. The entries were dated, each one a confession, assumed the worst of Miss Hale, spoke harshly to a tenant, ignored the needs of the household, allowed pride to guide my decisions. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because I want you to know that my change is not a performance," the Duke said. "It is not a gesture designed to win your favor. It is the work of a man who has looked at himself honestly and found himself wanting. I am trying to become better, not for you, not for my grandmother, but because I cannot bear to be the man I was." He closed the ledger and set it on the desk. Then he looked at her, his eyes steady. "I know you are leaving," he said. "I know you have no reason to stay, but before you go I need to say this. I am in love with you." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Marigold's breath caught. "I have been in love with you for longer than I want to admit," he continued. "I saw you, even when I tried not to. I watched you, even when I pretended I was only suspicious. I told myself you were a threat because the truth was too frightening, that a woman like you, with your quiet dignity and your unshakable strength, could undo me completely." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And you have undone me. You have shown me who I am and who I could be, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, even if you never look at me again." Marigold's eyes burned with tears. She had not expected this. She had expected apologies, explanations, perhaps a plea for forgiveness. But this was something else entirely. This was a man laying himself bare, holding nothing back. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," the Duke said. "I do not expect an answer. I do not expect your affection. I only wanted you to know the truth before you left." Marigold looked down at the ledger, at the carefully written confessions. She thought of the print gown, the apron, the shatter of glass on the ballroom floor. She thought of the rose garden, the poetry book, the papers that had revealed Mr. Thorne's deception. She thought of the Dowager who had seen everything and said nothing, waiting for the right moment. And then she thought of the future and what it might hold. "I have decided," she said slowly, "to leave Ashworth House." The Duke's face fell, but he did not argue. He only nodded, his jaw tight. "I understand," he said. "I wish you well, Miss Hale, wherever you go." "I am not finished," Marigold said. She stepped forward, her hands reaching for his. The touch was electric, a shock that ran through both of them. "I have decided to leave Ashworth House as a servant, but I have also decided that I will not leave you." The Duke stared at her, his eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Marigold said, her voice trembling, "that I will not run from this. I will not let fear or pride keep me from something that might be real. You have shown me the man you are becoming, and I want to see who that man will be. But I will do so on my own terms. I will not be your servant. I will not be your companion. I will be your equal, or I will be nothing." The Duke's hands tightened around hers. "You will be my equal," he said. "You will be my wife if you will have me. I will spend every day of my life proving that I am worthy of you." Marigold looked into his eyes, and she saw the truth there. It was not the polished veneer of a duke, not the practiced charm of a gentleman. It was the raw, unguarded soul of a man who had been broken open and had chosen to rebuild himself. And in that moment she knew. "Yes," she said, "I will have you, but I will not be handed anything. I will earn my place in this house as you have earned yours." The Duke laughed, a sound of pure, unguarded joy. "You already have. You saved this estate. You saved my grandmother. You saved me." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, her head resting against his chest, her heart pounding in time with his. The dowager, who had been listening at the door, smiled and walked away, her cane tapping softly on the floor. "It took them long enough," she muttered to herself, "but I suppose good things come to those who wait." And in the library the Duke and Marigold stood together, holding each other, the past finally put to rest and the future stretching out before them, bright and full of promise. The print gown and the apron were gone, long since thrown into the fire by the dowager who had declared them unfit for any woman to wear. In their place was a new gown, made of soft blue silk, waiting in Marigold's room. She would wear it at her wedding, and she would walk down the aisle of the village church with her head held high, and she would take her place as the Duchess of Ashworth. But she would never forget the woman who had worn the print gown, the woman who had knelt on the floor and mended the dowager's shawl, the woman who had saved a house that did not want her. That woman had been strong, that woman had been unbreakable, and that woman had won.